Concepts in a Teacup by HS Consultancy, presented by Harry Sewell. Plausible deniability. Now, if you haven't yet watched the episode on microaggressions, I'd encourage you to go and have a look at that before you listen to this one, because it might kind of make more sense. However, you can watch in whatever sequence you like. So, plausible deniability. Do you want some kind of history? It kind of comes from a Secret Service approach where if there was a desire for the kind of heads, the senior officials within that service to create a separation between themselves in some particular act, they would have an intent to not leave an audit trail. So if, for example, they were kind of watching someone who they thought might commit an offense and they kind of thought that person needed to be so-called eliminated, but they didn't want it to be explicit that they gave that instruction, they could, in an oblique way, communicate that this is the kind of intended outcome without saying it explicitly. Nothing would be in writing, and if there was a particular incident that was being investigated at a later stage, there'd be nothing in writing. There'd be no evidence that they explicitly, in an absolute way, gave the instruction. So it kind of creates this separation where some alternative explanation could be offered for why this particular incident occurred. Sounds familiar, huh? When you think about microaggressions, by definition, they are ambiguous. And because of that ambiguity, it means that the person who transgressed could come up with an alternative explanation for why they did what they did. So I kind of gave that example of Chester Pierce in that hotel lobby. If you go to the microaggressions episode, and the white guest coming in and putting the bags down and saying, room 426, and offering him $10 as the only black guy in the lobby, and the kind of perception of that might be, well, was there some kind of profiling occurring? Why would you assume that the only black guy seems to be the porter? Then what could happen is, if challenged on that, the second guest could say, well, actually, it was nothing to do with you being black. It was just that you had a dark suit on, and from afar it looked like uniform, and that's why I proffered my bags and offered you the $10. And that's an example of plausible deniability, where someone's called out or challenged. They can find an alternative explanation for why they did or said what they had done. Now, the thing about plausible deniability is that it kind of relates to two aspects. One is that there are aspects of ourselves which are invisible to us. So sometimes people really don't realize that they had done that thing. And because it wasn't explicit, and because I'm going to introduce unconscious bias, and I know that's controversial, that's for another episode, but because this thing was outside of their awareness, this oblique reference to an aspect of identity or a stereotype, they didn't realize that's what they've done. So when challenged on it, they really don't think that that's what they've done, because they didn't even notice. The other explanation in Keon West's work on scientific racism is interesting here, where he kind of talks about deception, and this is what plausible deniability also relates to, is that sometimes, because of social acceptability bias, again, maybe we could do an episode on that, because people understand that it's socially unacceptable to be seen to be discriminatory or racist, they will find some way of explaining their behavior that means they don't have to raise their hand and go, yep, okay, they've got a hand to raise, that they don't have to go, yeah, okay, I take responsibility, I take accountability for that. They kind of, through pretense, find an alternative way of describing what has just occurred. Sometimes there's a slight word change or change in inflection or intonation, ways of just kind of saying, yes, I think what I just did was discriminatory. So you've got the two aspects. You've got the possibility that they just literally haven't realized because it's outside of their awareness. And I know, as I say, it's contentious because some people think that it's an excuse, but there's a lot of science around unconscious bias that tells us that yes, sometimes we do things outside of our conscious awareness. But then you've got that other element, as I say, around deception, the kind of desire for social acceptability, and therefore kind of not wishing to own up. So that's kind of plausible deniability, and it will manifest itself in the workplace or in circles where someone makes a joke or someone says something, and it's often followed up with, oh, you've taken that the wrong way, I didn't mean it like that. Or, yeah, it wasn't because of this aspect of your identity. It wasn't because, this person was black or Asian or any other aspect of identity. It wasn't because of that. There's some other reason. And it kind of happens quite routinely. Someone might say, actually the reason I responded was because I was tired or I was hungry, or some other explanation. So that's plausible deniability. And just to note that the plausible bit in it is because it could potentially be plausible. That's the whole point about it, is that you can't disprove it because it's plausible. If it was completely implausible, then it wouldn't make sense as an alternative explanation. So when we're talking about microaggressions or those encounters that feel racialized in that way, there is this kind of big possibility that what will be met with is plausible deniability.